Hello and welcome to the ReImagination Café Podcast. I'm Jessica Cherry. This is part 2 of our special 2-part conversation exploring how our public spaces can help address some of society's biggest challenges. To start us off, here are a few voices from part 1 and some you'll hear coming up reflecting on the power, purpose, and magic of our civic commons.
It wasn't unusual for me to be walking my dog in the morning and to just say good morning to somebody. It's amazing how those simple words could start a conversation. Different people, different conversations, finding a common ground.
When the world shut down in 2020, where did we go? The only places we could go were our parks, trails, and public spaces. That's where we gathered. We gathered for relief. And when we spend time together in civic spaces with people who do look differently than us, we find that we have more in common with each other than divides us. That's the magic of public spaces.
If we hope to reknit society, we need more shared moments of connection. And I think these moments allow our humanity to shine. And honestly, where we are right now, I can't imagine anything more urgent than really thinking about how we have a rebirth around civic culture.
What great public space does is it helps us understand that our world is bigger and includes more people than we think it does. It keeps strangers from feeling strange. That is a very noble quest, and it's why we need a civic commons.
And joining us again today is the guest who made such a compelling case in part 1 that our civic commons can spark connection, rebuild trust, strengthen communities, and maybe even bring a little more joy into our lives. I'm talking about the driving force behind reimagining the Civic Commons, its director, Bridget Marquis. Bridget, thanks so much for coming back.
Thank you. It's good to be back with you.
So Bridget, in our last conversation, you really helped us see what's possible when we invest in our civic commons. We also spent some time speaking with 2 local leaders from Akron, Ohio, Dan Rice, convener of the Civic Commons Initiative there, and Grace Hudson, longtime resident of the Summit Lake neighborhood, which is a focus of the Civic Commons work in Akron. Today, we're going to do a deep dive into 2 other Civic Commons cities, Detroit and Memphis. And we'll once again play clips from my conversations with local leaders before coming back to you for some additional questions. But Bridget, before we dive in, is there anything you'd like to share about how Dan and Grace's work in Akron connects to what we'll explore today?
So the work that we discussed in part 1 and that Dan and Grace beautifully illustrated is really the foundation for what we'll explore today through the lens of the Civic Commons efforts in Detroit and Memphis. And I would say while these cities are very different from Akron, the focus on connecting people across divides, on building trust and resilience is really this commonality across all 3 of these cities and across all the cities that participate in reimagining the Civic Commons.
So we're going to begin with Detroit, which had filed for municipal bankruptcy in 2013, emerged in 2014. So when the Detroit Civic Commons Initiative launched in 2016, downtown was beginning to rebound, but there were still significant vacancies across the city. Can you talk a little bit about the specific challenges the city was facing at that point?
So the 2008 financial crisis hit Detroit especially hard. There's some stats that show that between 2004 and 2014, Detroit lost more than 200,000 residents across the city. And as you mentioned, while downtown and midtown were rebounding by 2016, there was still quite a lot of vacancy in neighborhoods across the city. So for instance, in the Fitzgerald neighborhood, which is the focus for Civic Commons in Detroit, which is this quarter square mile area in the city's northwest side, there were more than 400 vacant lots or buildings. And since launching in 2016, Detroit has this really diverse cross-silo collaboration of residents, nonprofits, city agencies, and investment partners that are really focused on turning vacancy in this neighborhood of Fitzgerald into an inviting network of public spaces to serve as this model for the rest of the city where they're facing vacancy. So where there were 26 vacant lots, there's now Ella Fitzgerald Park that has a custom built wooden play space for all ages, that has a full-size basketball court. It has grills, a picnic pavilion. There's Ella Fitzgerald Greenway that connects across the neighborhood. West McNichols, which is their commercial corridor, known locally as 6 Mile. It used to be a 4-lane speedway, but the team redesigned it to prioritize people with wider sidewalks, street trees, bike lanes, bus bump outs, you name it, and much slower traffic, so it's safer. And the retail spaces are starting to come back alive on that corridor. And I will say the way that they did this work is really important. They intentionally and continuously included neighborhood residents in the planning and design process every step of the way.
So this idea of using public space to transform vacancy into something that brings people together really became the core of the work in Fitzgerald. And to understand how this work actually came together on the ground, I spoke with Detroit's Alexa Bush, who has been working to revitalize Detroit's public spaces for many years, and whose passion for her work and for the people of Detroit is quite infectious. So we'll play that clip, and woven into that is a separate conversation I had with a small business owner from Detroit, Karlyta Williams. But to lead us into that clip, Bridget, can you tell us a little bit about Alexa?
Alexa was originally one of the conveners doing work in the Fitzgerald neighborhood every day on the ground. She has since then become the director of planning for the city of Detroit and brings a real level of depth of insight into this work, both as a local practitioner on the ground and also as a thought leader for the field.
And here's that clip. So Alexa, when this work began in 2016, what was going on the ground in Detroit?
So when we began this work, we were coming out of bankruptcy as a city, but also the Great Recession was still really present for us. We saw a lot of the subprime mortgage crisis. We saw a lot of people who had homes underwater. We had people who lost homes to foreclosure. And we were really focused on how do we protect and stabilize the neighborhoods, the residents, the people who had hung on through some really challenging times. Like many cities post-war, the American dream was your white picket fence, your house. It was a very individual-oriented way of developing. But as we started to think about Detroit's recovery, especially after bankruptcy, we really saw opportunities to say some of these places subdivided incredibly quickly to deal with how fast the population grew in the teens and the 20s in Detroit. We have an opportunity to revisit our whole urban fabric and say, in a place where now we might have some vacancy, how could we reimagine some of these neighborhoods actually around a communal space, a public space? How could that become the driver for this community's future? How could we create a more resilient place? Where do kids play? Where do families want to be? Where do we connect? How do we be together?
And I know you focused extensively on a neighborhood in Northwest Detroit called Fitzgerald. Why did you choose Fitzgerald?
Fitzgerald was really on the tipping point between neighborhoods that were more stable, had less vacancy and less public ownership, and a neighborhood that was right on the edge where we thought, can we invest in this place and help tip this neighborhood to more stable rather than let disinvestment, risk, fear creep in and tip it the other way? It's also a neighborhood that had some pretty incredible adjacencies. There were 2 universities next to this neighborhood. And within a mile, you had multiple other neighborhoods where the average household income was about 10 times that of Fitzgerald. So we really saw an opportunity in close proximity. If we could invest in this place, if we could intentionally put high quality public spaces in this neighborhood, could we leverage these neighborhoods that are so adjacent and actually build social capital, build relationships, build connections with people in public spaces that could be to everyone's benefit.
So in hearing about all of these new public spaces, I find myself thinking about those civic assets that really reflect the identity of a city. And something I've been really eager to ask you is, when you think of Detroit, I think most of us immediately think about its rich cultural heritage. We think of Motown. We think of music icons like Stevie Wonder, Aretha Franklin, Diana Ross, and Eminem. So how have you been able to weave Detroit's rich cultural identity, including its musical heritage, into its public spaces?
This is something we spend a lot of time thinking about, how to draw these connections between the richness of our past and where we want to go into the future. Stevie Wonder lived in the Bagley neighborhood, which is just north of Fitzgerald. And so a lot of these people grew up in these neighborhoods, and it's quite well known by folks who live here, like who lived up the block. We thought really carefully in building the park in particular about how we might be able to integrate some of this heritage, but also use the arts as a platform to engage with residents. We ended up naming the park Ella Fitzgerald Park, which
Who is not from Detroit, right?
was not. Also, it is not named for the singer.
Oh, really?
There was a school, Ella Fitzgerald School,
Oh,
that
oh my
had
goodness.
ceased to be the neighborhood school, but we sort of embraced the play on words, brought a musical element to the park design itself, and there's a traffic calming element in the street. The park bridges vacant land across a city street. There's a basketball court on one side, a grassy area on the other. And to calm traffic, our design team came up with the idea to take the chord pattern of Dream a Little Dream, and we turned that into a graphic that we laid down on the street.
I love that.
It was really fun. I mean, you can know the joke and appreciate it. It also just looks cool in and of itself.
Absolutely.
But it was like a fun Easter egg to hide in the park. So we had a lot of fun thinking about those elements. We worked with a local artist, Hubert Massey, who designed a mural that went in at the park that had a really cool mosaic by number process where we were able to invite residents to help us build these murals that told the story of the park they wanted. We felt like integrating those elements helped reinforce the sense of place, the sense of belonging, the sense of ownership in the community. And in a place where there hadn't been investment in quite some time, we really wanted to make sure people realized, like, it's for you. It tells your story. It's not just showing up here, but we really wanted to be thoughtful about how it best connected that legacy, that history, and the lived experience of who was there with where we could go in the future.
And so you're drawing people together and reinforcing that shared sense of ownership through connection to community history and collaborative co-creation. Really powerful. Now, you've also backed up this work with data through resident surveys, for example. So what did you find specifically in terms of how people's perceptions of their neighborhood changed?
We were able to show progress and really change the perception of the neighborhood, even beyond what we might have guessed we would have had an impact around. I think we did ask, please tell us about the direction of your neighborhood. Is it improving a lot? Is it staying the same? Is it declining a lot? I want to say there was something like a 60% point improvement in terms of people thinking the neighborhood would go from declining a lot in the future to improving a lot over this 5-year period. I mean, the change in perception was quite dramatic. And I think it gets down into the small things of, do you do the roof repair? Do you repaint your front porch? If you're not thinking this is a place that's moving in the right direction. I think we saw that backed up in the survey, this huge amount of confidence and excitement about staying in the neighborhood. But we also started to see it in the way that people began to care for or invest in their properties.
That's really interesting. And yeah, it makes sense. If people feel that their neighborhood's improving, they're going to be more likely to make those investments themselves. So additional value created there. So Alexa, when you were doing all of this work across the neighborhood, creating these inviting public spaces, working closely with residents and starting to see their perception shift, was there a moment when you thought, oh my gosh, this is working. We're really having a positive impact in the community?
So I think one of those major moments where I thought, okay, we've done it, was really as we were beginning to get through the construction phase on Ella Fitzgerald Park. I remember driving up San Juan, which is one of the streets adjacent to the park. I don't remember if I was going to a community meeting or what I was doing, but I remember driving by the park on an evening after work, looking over and seeing a bounce house in the park, like a 5-year-old birthday party. There were balloons, there were people everywhere. I didn't tell anyone or mind whether or not they pulled a permit, but The fact that whoever had decided this was the place where the kid's birthday was happening and the bounce house showed up, I think the fears we had about would people love this place, would it feel like theirs, would it be this community's park, really melted away, where I'm like, we did it. Like the bounce house, when the birthday party happens in the park, it felt really special. Like we had connected with people. So that was a great moment to drive down the street and feel like, we did it.
What a great story and a clear signal that the space had really become part of the community. So I want to shift a bit to the West McNichols Commercial Corridor. But one thread that really connects all of this work is how each investment is doing multiple things at once. In particular, creating inviting public spaces that also deliver environmental benefits. Can you talk a little bit about that?
We spent a lot of time really trying to think about vacant land in the community as truly an asset and not a liability. And I think we're able to really weave environmental sustainability into a lot of that work. We took about 50 vacant lots and turned them into a new park and non-motorized greenway that connects across the neighborhood. And I think what we really thought about was this investment is a safety improvement. It's slowing down cars. It's creating safer connections for people, but it's also planting new trees, lots of native plants, creating these vibrant outdoor spaces. It is absorbing stormwater. That this infrastructure we're investing in, we knew had to do multiple things at the time, and we really believed in the capacity to be thoughtful about all the different ways that these investments in public spaces could really contribute to the community.
And as the McNichols Commercial Corridor started to change physically, the additional green investment making it a more attractive, welcoming place, and also as it became more easily accessible to neighborhood residents, you also started to see new businesses open up. Alexa, can you talk a little bit about how you supported small businesses and encouraged entrepreneurs to open up their retail shops there?
So McNichols had this critical mass of stores and a few retailers that were supporting the community. And we wanted to think about not only how do we support those small businesses, but grow the opportunity for entrepreneurship. There was a lot of human capital in this neighborhood as well. There was a lot of really organized block clubs. We worked closely with the community organization, the Live 6 Alliance. They played a major role of providing technical assistance and support to businesses, coordinating things like a clean and safe program on the corridor that would really start to change the perception of this neighborhood and the corridor itself.
And something I've heard you talk about is how the Live 6 Alliance put its headquarters in a storefront right in the middle of the McNichols corridor. And they called it Neighborhood Home Base. And it increases foot traffic while also serving as a community gathering space for meetings and a conference space. Local government officials hold office hours there, and small business owners and others from the community can get their questions answered in real time. So there's a lot of transparency there, and it's really, I think, kind of indicative of the broader collaboration among all these various stakeholders.
It was this really coordinated investment of working with small businesses, working with entrepreneurs to activate commercial space, working with nonprofit partners. And then the city played a big role in investing in the physical infrastructure of the street itself.
And Alexa, you were kind enough to introduce me to an entrepreneur and small business owner, Karlyta Williams, who opened up a non-alcoholic bottle shop and social space, Mockery Zero Proof, right on West McNichols. And she talked both about the support she's received from the Live 6 Alliance and what she's learned through her participation in Reimagining the Civic Commons. And we'll play that clip here, and then Alexa will come back to you. Karlyta, welcome and thank you for joining me. So you shared with me that you developed the idea for Mockery Zero Proof during COVID while quarantined, and that you wanted to create a space that offered zero-proof cocktails, but also a space where people felt welcomed in. I believe you said you wanted people to feel like they were being welcomed into your living room. So why did you choose to establish that space on the West McNichols corridor?
I chose to put Mockeries inside of the West McNichols corridor because I wanted to be inside of a neighborhood. My great-grandparents had a grocery store called Lewis Market in Southwest Detroit. where I grew up, and it was on the corner in a neighborhood where there were houses on each side of it. You didn't have to go to a larger commercial area where there was like a strip mall. It sat right there inside of the neighborhood. And I got to see as a very young girl the difference that made and what that felt like.
One thing I've taken away from my conversations with both you and Alexa is that there was a long time when it didn't feel like that. When, due to disinvestment and other factors, neighborhoods like Fitzgerald felt forgotten. And a key goal of Detroit Civic Commons has been to restore that sense of neighborhood you remember from when you were a very young girl along the McNichols Corridor. So have you seen that sense of connection and that neighborhood feel come back? And if so, what does that look like on the ground from your perspective?
What I've seen evolve over the years is that there is a whole lot more investment inside of getting commercial corridors set up inside of these neighborhoods. And it's great because the more that you can establish these things inside of neighborhoods, the more people have these opportunities to get out and meet their neighbors. West McNichols is built on the outskirts of the neighborhood. It's that main strip where people in the neighborhood come out to live. It's where they come out to go in the bike lane with their kids, walk their dogs. One of the things I love the most about where I'm located is that you watch people walk from this central area out to the end of their block. And as soon as you hit that corner, West McNichols just opens up to you. It's just this strip of these things that are there and available. My shop is mostly windows, and I love seeing people's expressions when they get to the end of the block and they look left and they look right and they're making a decision on where it is they're going to go. It's quite beautiful to watch. Ultimately, what you are investing in is what I call your front porch reach. And this idea of having all the things that you need at the arm's length of your front porch.
What a great way to frame it. And it really ties back to something Bridget talked about in part one, that so many of us don't even know our neighbors. And of course, when people have that kind of close everyday proximity, whether it's a grocery store, a cafe, or other shared spaces, they're much more likely to run into each other, build relationships, and actually feel part of a community, which is something so many of us really need right now. So Reimagining the Civic Commons partners with several local organizations in Detroit, including the Live 6 Alliance. What is your relationship with the Live 6 Alliance, and how have they supported your journey as an entrepreneur?
So the Live 6 Alliance was the steady from the very moment that I stepped onto West McNichols. They came down and introduced themselves prior to me even opening my doors. And they did something very special that I think every small business owner wants. And that is a sense of reassurance that not only are you here, but we want you here. It was specifically the Live 6 Alliance that introduced me to the Reimagining Civic Commons effort and asking me, is this something that you think you'd be interested in? And I said, absolutely.
And you were invited to go on a Reimagining the Civic Commons trip where you visited another Civic Commons neighborhood in Minneapolis, right?
It was amazing. Visited the Rondo neighborhood. And what I loved the most about when I got to see Reimagining Civic Commons up close and personal is that it challenges you to open your eyes to what is going on beyond your front porch. And so when you come back, you can inform that, like, hey, this is what's happening in Minneapolis. I've seen how this has played out. And it aids in being able to come back and just give even more to your community. Going out to Minneapolis did something for me inside of the character building of being an entrepreneur, because going on that trip, engaging with, learning more about Reimagining Civic Commons gave me an opportunity to confirm and affirm to myself the importance of small businesses within neighborhoods.
Karlyta, why do you think the Reimagining the Civic Commons model has worked so well in Detroit?
So I grew up in Southwest Detroit, and there was never a time in my neighborhood where I did not have a deep feeling that everyone who was in that neighborhood was very proud to be in that neighborhood. And I don't know a Detroiter who doesn't guard their neighborhood fiercely. I think that Reimagining Civic Commons is getting it right because they are pulling folks like Alexa, pulling folks that are sitting inside of Live 6 home base, pulling folks like me who are small business owners and native Detroiters who have these perspectives that don't look like they are coming from outside. They are coming from folks who live, work, and have thrived inside of these environments and have a love for the cities and neighborhoods that they've lived in. It's not coming from a space of just wanting to establish and expand industry or just commercial things. It's wanting to expand it inside of this space of community. How do we get everyone to come together? How do we get everyone to know that this place is for them and that everything that we are building and everything we are considering them? We are not excluding the individuals who know the most about the city from the conversation.
And that's, of course, a theme we see in all of the Civic Commons work. So, Karlyta, when you imagine this corridor 5 to 10 years from now, what do you hope people will experience when they walk down McNichols?
In 5 or 10 years, I hope that when people walk down McNichols, it feels alive in a way that perhaps their grandparents told them about. Living in Detroit, you get those stories passed down to you from your elders about what this used to be like. I hope in 5 to 10 years, I can tell my grandchildren, I was here when all of this was being reimagined. And I hope that one day you're walking down West McNichols and you can take yoga, get coffee, have a non-alcoholic drink, listen to music, because this is what I remember when I was growing up in my neighborhood. I hope that people talk about it in celebration. And I hope that it feels like the honoring of being at home.
So, Karlyta, you personally have lived in Detroit your whole life. You've heard the stories of what once was, and now you're right in the middle of that renewal. What does that mean to you personally?
Oh, my gosh. I'll be honored for the rest of my life, no matter what happens and where mockery goes. I will always feel honored to have been on West McNichols and watched all of this momentum and remembering from right out of my corner shop window and to have been a part of it on the ground level. I am on a very magical street, and every person from the community who comes in reaffirms that every day. I am in the midst of magic. And Reimagining Civic Commons came in and put the icing on the cake and said, hey, not only do we believe in this neighborhood, but we believe in where you come from, your story, and I'm sure that my great-grandparents would be proud.
Karlyta, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
There's such a deep sense of pride there. And Alexa, as a fellow native Detroiter, did any part of that conversation especially resonate with you?
The thing that really struck me was really understanding from Karlyta what participating in reinvestment and economic recovery looks like for her as a business owner, but also as a person. A lot of us who've been working and planning for Detroit in the last decade, a lot of us grew up with these stories. I think we lived through a time where the national press essentially left Detroit for dead. Nothing's happening there. It's over. I think her sense of pride of what it's meant to help rebuild a place that she cares about, to really invest in community, resonated with me, I think, not only in the McNichols neighborhood, but in the recovery that we're starting to see across the city as investment comes back and people really think about what the future could hold.
So building on that, Alexa, when looking back over the past decade of your involvement with the Detroit Civic Commons Initiative, zooming out from the individual stories, has anything surprised you or really stood out as indicative of the broader impact of this work in Detroit?
What I found really amazing is a lot of this, when we started, felt like a good idea and a hypothesis. Like, we really think if we invest in these places, we will rebuild civic life, we'll attract businesses, we'll move the needle on things like public confidence in the neighborhood. We believed in it. It's been really amazing to see a lot of that work come to fruition. I think to see what Detroit's been able to do, not only in this neighborhood, but citywide, even in our downtown across the last decade, I think there was a real feeling, hey, we're out here on our own in Detroit, that we've all got together, public sector, private sector, philanthropy, residents. We feel kind of like we built a lot of this ourselves and coming together and being really intentional in this work. To see some of the parks open, to see new businesses on corridors, it's really amazing and a testament to the strength of the community here to not give up. That's been really powerful to be a part of for the last decade.
Alexa, thank you so much for joining me today.
Absolutely. We love sharing our story in Detroit and so happy to be part of the conversation.
So really compelling to get the perspectives of two native Detroiters who care so deeply about their city, both raised on stories of what Detroit once was, and each driven by a real passion for its renewal.
Hearing Alexa say that when we started this work 10 years ago, we thought it was a good idea, that it had the potential to move the needle, but it was truly only a hypothesis. And that's very accurate. And now to see it bearing fruit, I think this is incredibly exciting. And it's not just exciting for Detroit, but for the nation. It's this model that really any community could pick up, and it can help rebuild trust, rebuild hope, rebuild neighborhoods.
Some of my favorite moments from that, her story about seeing the bounce house and driving by the park and seeing that. And then she said, I don't even care if they pulled a permit. It doesn't matter to me. But that made her feel like, yeah, they're really thinking that this is their park.
Agreed. And I would also say Alexa is a public official, right? She's coming at it from the public sector. So I also think she is such a great example of humanizing government that I think the public spaces allow government to do. It gives them a face that allows them to be out in community, to build the trust that they are able to build, and to invite people into believing in government again.
That's a great point, and especially at a time when trust in government is in fairly short supply. And Karlyta has clearly become a real advocate for rebuilding civic life.
I found it really exciting and confirming to hear Karlyta, as a small business owner, really echo this idea of the importance of civic life. So not only is she working to have this successful Main Street storefront business, but she's equally committed to reviving the public life of McNichols and the nearby neighborhoods. And what that teaches me is the civic commons and asking some new questions about our public realm can open up new opportunities for people, from small business owners like Karlyta, but really all sorts of people, to step into this new role as champions for a renewing civic life. It's this invitation to reconsider a deeper why for your work, a why that starts to center society.
So important in the world we're living in today. So we've seen how this work is reshaping neighborhoods in Detroit. Now in Memphis, the starting point and the challenges were very different.
Yes. So Memphis is a Black majority city. It is starkly divided by race and income. And it's also a low density city, which means residential segregation is even more likely to hinder socioeconomic mixing. So if people are already sorted by race and class, geographic sprawl makes them even less likely to encounter one another. Compounding these divisions, prior to reimagining the Civic Commons, there were really few places where Memphians of different backgrounds felt welcome to come together and share space as equals. So in 2016, when Reimagining the Civic Commons kicked off in Memphis, the area that's now known as the Fourth Bluff, which is this 4-block area along the Mississippi River that is home to a couple of parks, a historic library, and a number of other civic assets, it wasn't on the mental map of most Memphians. And if it wasn't for a good reason. One park was still home to a Confederate monument, while another was formally named after a Confederate leader.
So very divisive.
Exactly. They weren't welcoming. They were divisive. So the local team worked together not only to remove those monuments, but just as importantly, to redesign, to reconsider the management and the programming of these spaces to become intentionally welcoming to people of all races and backgrounds. So the day after the last Civil War cannon was removed, which was sort of the final vestige of its divisive past, the renamed Fourth Bluff Park hosted Dinner en Blanc, which is this pop-up dinner party that welcomed 1,000 people from across the city to joyfully take back this space by breaking bread together. And they immediately moved into construction on the redesign after that dinner. And now the park has walking paths and cafe seating. It's perfect for an alfresco lunch. It's right downtown. They planted 50 new trees so people can escape the Memphis heat in this little oasis. They curate public art for the space. So they've just been really intentional at making sure that Memphians feel like this is their space.
And I understand that they also implemented a robust and innovative programming schedule.
They have swing dancing. They have this concert series called Solon on the River that's locally produced. They host festivals of all sorts. They actually became the official NBA Grizzlies watch party location a few years ago when the Memphis Grizzlies were in the playoffs. And so the park was hosting a regular gathering with thousands of fans showing up to cheer on their team. So this notion that this space could be reclaimed and reclaimed for all of Memphis, but it meant you need to continually invite people in.
And I know that they took a similar approach at another location, formerly called Jefferson Davis Park, and now called River Garden, which we're actually going to talk more about later. But one of the things, Bridget, you've shared with me is that in addition to redesigning the physical space and implementing new and innovative programming, the organization that manages that space also changed its staffing model, taking single task positions such as maintenance or security and transforming them into what they call River Garden Rangers, who also now perform a welcoming function. So they serve as these ambassadors who ensure that everyone has a great experience. So a very multifaceted approach in Memphis, turning what were these very divisive spaces into go-to places for everyone. And I got to speak with someone from Memphis who is truly a powerhouse when it comes to public spaces, Coletta. And we're going to play a clip from that conversation in just a moment. But first, Bridget, tell us a little bit about Carol.
Carol is a dear friend and mentor, and she is really sort of the godmother of reimagining the Civic Commons. In fact, it was really her initial inquiry that led to the pilot in Philadelphia, and she is one of the founding funders of the initiative. So after launching the pilot as part of Knight Foundation's leadership team, Carol transitioned to Kresge Foundation in Memphis and continued to serve as part of the initiative steering committee. And then she eventually moved into the CEO role at Memphis River Parks Partnership, where she really centered the Civic Commons outcomes as sort of a core part of that organization's mission. And in that role, she's catalyzed really collaborative transformation of the Fourth Bluff, followed by Tom Lee Park, which has won a lot of awards and is really seen as this globally recognized public space. And I would say Carol is not just a public space dynamo, but really an expert on all things city.
And here's that clip. Carol, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
So when the Reimagining the Civic Commons work began in Memphis, the riverfront, especially the Fourth Bluff area, wasn't really on most people's mental map. And some of those spaces even felt quite divisive. What made you look at that stretch of the Mississippi River and think this could actually be the asset that changes the trajectory of the city?
I would say it was opportunistic. We focused on two parks with Confederate associations. One was named Confederate Park. The other was named Jefferson Davis Park. And we focused there because, one, they needed to have the Confederate associations removed. That was number one. Number two, each were 1 square block parks. We didn't have a lot of money at the time, so it was a bite we could chew. And the third thing is that both parks are downtown adjacent, but downtown on the north and the south edges has some very distressed neighborhoods, low-resourced neighborhoods with people of very low incomes. And so the advantage is that people of higher incomes, people of lower incomes could walk to the park, they could bike to the park. But the great thing is they are close enough to be very accessible to people with a range of incomes. And one of the original goals of reimagining the Civic Commons was to get people of different incomes in the same space at the same time. And that's very hard to do in America. We live in very income segregated neighborhoods. We go to income segregated schools. We are more racially integrated than we were 50 years ago, but we live in more income segregated ways. So to find the places where people of high income, low income can actually be together is very difficult to do. And we felt like the riverfront parks not only had location advantage, but they also, because they were on this magnificent Mississippi River, they punched above their weight in terms of allure. And I believe allure is a key ingredient of being able to get people of high income and low incomes in the same space at the same time.
Sure, those places that draw everybody in, and allure is such a wonderful term for that. So, Carol, you mentioned that the number one reason you focused on these two parks on the riverfront, Confederate Park and Jefferson Davis Park, was because of their Confederate associations. But this was 2016. So those Confederate symbols had been there in this Black majority city for a very long time. So how did you go about turning these divisive spaces into places where everyone felt welcome?
One of the first parks we did was Confederate Park with a Jefferson Davis statue in it. That was in downtown on top of the bluff. A woman who was in the beginning leading the work in Memphis, a woman named Maria Furman, who worked for Mayor Jim Strickland at the time, came up with the idea to name it Fourth Bluff. That was the historic Fourth Bluff. And I love that. And so they renamed the park. Then we took the statue down. Then we remade the park. And it went in that order. The removal of the statue, it took some legal maneuvers, but the statue did get removed. And we immediately put artwork by African-American artist Hank Willis Thomas in the park. He's very, very well known for good reason. And these sculptures, what was great about them is they were open as captions, as thought bubbles.
And I just want to create a very detailed description here for people listening. So these sculptures look like oversized speech bubbles, like you see in comic books. They're made from steel, so they have sort of an industrial look, and they're not filled in. So the steel creates an outline of these thought bubbles. And each piece also doubles as functional seating. So people are encouraged to physically enter the bubble and become part of the artwork. And Carol, I'll let you address the deeper issue of what these sculptures represent and what they meant to residents. But just one more thing I want to add, which is that if you compare these sculptures to the Jefferson Davis statue that had previously held court in what is now Fourth Bluff Park, which stood on this tall, imposing pedestal well above eye level, well, suffice it to say, it's quite a contrast.
It was lovely to have the thought bubbles as a suggestion that you could think about the past, the wrongs of the past. How do we write the past? What do we do with this place? What do we do with our city? I love the provocation of the art. I could see that park out my office window. So people would come and pose in front of them, behind them, looking through them. It was quite the picture frame. I took great joy from watching people pose with those sculptures for birthdays and graduations and anniversaries. And it was just such a beautiful thing to see that park as such an invitation to everybody. And everybody certainly found ways to use that park.
So the space shifts from being a stark and divisive reminder of the wrongs of the past to becoming an invitation to get curious and to imagine a more inclusive future. So Carol, you were one of the original funders of Reimagining the Civic Commons, and one of the initiative's key outcomes is value creation. So I would love to hear your perspective on the most effective ways to create value through public spaces and how you've approached that through the Memphis Civic Commons. And something I've heard you say is that the civic assets that create the most value are not those places you visit once a year when friends or family come into town. They're the places that you use every day, that you incorporate into your everyday life. And that's not always an easy thing to do, perhaps particularly in Memphis, given the unique challenges of the riverfront, where the bluffs and surrounding infrastructure can make access more complicated.
The riverfront is not easy to access. It is below the city, so it's a steep climb down, a steep climb back up. If you're coming from the water, you have to come up Cobblestone Landing. You then hit for sometimes 5-lane road. You cross a set of railroad tracks. You go up a steep hill, and then you're in the city. So the places you go every day typically are easily accessible and don't require a lot of thought. You just do it. So making spaces easily accessible, making the spaces you want people to be the default is easier said than done on the riverfront with those existing conditions. We continue to work on mitigating some of that separation. We built one new magnificent, completely ADA accessible way to get from the top of the bluff to the bottom of the banks. Very important. And we've created a new attraction, a beautiful walkway out of the river. It's not yet open, but on the south end of the property. So all of a sudden, there will be much more really easy, intuitive access. That is critical to value creation, because any spot of beauty, if you can look out on it, your life is enhanced and your real estate value is enhanced. But being able to easily experience it enhances the value even more.
Can you share an example of a space that maybe had the potential to be one of those everyday spaces, but that wasn't being utilized that way, where you were able to unlock that potential?
In one of the spaces that we made, a space called Tom Lee Park, which is part of our Civic Commons work, it was a space that basically functioned as a fairgrounds, as an event site for 7 great days a year when there was a very robust festival using that park space, 31 acres. The problem was every other day of the year, that space was not attractive. It provided no shade, no activity, no programming. No, nothing. Windswept and cold in the winter and hot as could be in the summer, with only a pathway and some benches in it. That was a space that functioned really well 7 days a year. There was such a limited time that space could be used. And you hate to think that 31 acres of great land on your riverfront are preserved for 7 days a year.
Of course. And as Bridget mentioned, that space is now a globally recognized, award-winning inclusive public space. It provides free access for people of all income levels. It has playgrounds and walking trails. And it also tells the story of Tom Lee, a local hero who rescued passengers from a sinking steamboat in 1925. So quite a transformation there. Now, one of the challenges with spaces like this is making sure that it's not just great on its own, but it's actually connected to the rest of the city. And I know that you built a bike pedestrian trail along the riverfront that connects Tom Lee Park to River Garden, Greenbelt Park, and other public spaces.
It's not a perfect trail, it's a 1.0 version, but at least we had that early connection. There's a woman, Mary Jo Waits, from Arizona State. She would talk about big deals and small wonders. And every city needs both. And certainly every downtown needs both. And it's easy to overlook the small wonders because you're focused on the big deals.
That's such a great way to put it. And we've seen several examples of those small wonders in the Civic Commons work we've been highlighting. Lovely language there. So as one of the Reimagining the Civic Commons demonstration cities, Memphis received an initial $4 million grant. But it almost feels like that was seed money, right? It helped prove to other funders in the city that these projects were worth investing in with real returns. And I know that a lot more capital has followed since then. Can you talk a little bit about how that initial investment helped catalyze additional funding for the riverfront and for other parts of Memphis?
Reimagining the Civic Commons seed money helped Memphis investors and state investors see potential they had never seen. And that's what opened up the pocketbooks. So Reimagining Civic Commons, even though we did 2 very modest parks to begin with, it was a demonstration of what kind of transformation could take place. It also gave us a lot of experience. It gave the staff a lot of experience in taking care of, for instance, of natural landscape, to proving that we could do more than cut grass and pick up garbage. That was very instrumental in building trust and belief that if we invested more, it would result in spaces that were well cared for. So we raised more than $100 million for the riverfront. And if you throw in the library and now the Memphis Art Museum, I think the Memphis Art Museum, frankly, would never have gone in that location if there had not been a reimagining the Civic Commons. So it focused attention on a part of Memphis that had really been overlooked, that looks out over the Mississippi River, where really the river at Memphis is at its widest and wildest. So it is a magnificent natural asset. We did nothing to earn it. You couldn't buy it. And you think, it's ours. Why aren't we doing anything with it? And that became evident out of Civic Commons. So it's not just value creation in the sense of money. I believe it's value creation in a sense of who we believe ourselves to be and how we think about our potential and the potential of our city. That's priceless. So when you think about value, it's so much more than did we generate another real estate investment. That's important. We need that. But that's probably the least valuable thing that this investment did.
You've said that sharing space with strangers, including people who don't look like you, helps build empathy, and that empathy is essential to community and to democracy. What role do public spaces, like the Memphis riverfront, play in strengthening the civic life of a city and ultimately our democracy?
We are living in very divided times, and we are living at a moment where media reinforces that every minute of every day. It is very easy to ascribe qualities in the world we're living in to people who don't look like you that engender fear, mistrust, degradation, lack of opportunity, withholding of opportunity. It inhibits creativity, and it promotes a set of very useless stereotypes. I believe, especially with what we see in the media, in social media, most especially, is stereotypes that get in our heads. And because we don't live near people who are different than we are, and we don't go to school with people who are different than us, those stereotypes just get bigger and bigger, and they stick because they're shortcuts, and they stick in ways that keep you from seeing and feeling the people around you. And I think public space that is designed and managed in a way that can attract people across difference is the most democratic thing we can do. I think it is the thing that holds the most promise for democracy, because it is the only thing that gives us a chance to overcome the stereotypes and see people and feel their stories. What great public space does that attracts people across demographics is it helps us understand that our world is bigger and includes more people than we think it does. And it keeps strangers from feeling strange. That, I think, is a very noble quest, and it's why we need a civic commons.
That was beautifully put. And it's also really powerful. The idea that public spaces can help us see each other more fully and make strangers feel less strange feels like such an essential and hopeful vision for democracy. So, Carol, you grew up in Memphis, and you used to take the bus downtown as a girl. When you see the riverfront today, with people gathering and sharing those spaces, what does that transformation mean to you personally?
I used to ride the 13 Lauderdale bus downtown, and now I've been living steps off the riverfront in a historic district, Cotton Row, for 50 years. What is interesting is that when I was a kid coming downtown, there was only one time of the year that I ever thought about the riverfront or went to the riverfront. And that was Cotton Carnival. It was a spinoff of Mardi Gras. They would bring in a king and queen and their court on the floats on a barge at the riverfront. They would step off at the foot of Monroe and the court would come on and they would have fireworks, and it was very grand. That's what I remember. And it's interesting how far away the riverfront felt when I was a girl, because you would come downtown and Main Street, which is literally 2 blocks from the riverfront, we would never turn to the river because it just felt too far away and there was nothing there when you got there. So it's funny that it barely touches my imagination as a child, and yet today it looms very large in the life and the imagination of kids.
If you wanted someone to really understand how different the riverfront feels today, where would you take them and what would they see happening there?
River Garden is just this little jewel. It's a 1 square block park. In it are these nests that are made from native trees. They are woven together. Kids sit in them. We have this all ages climbing structure that's beautiful. And you crawl up in a net and then you crawl up this ladder. It's really fun. And we have this lookout on top, a beautiful little lawn. We also have a pavilion in there that people use with movable tables and chairs. And then you walk by the river with this notion of you can actually crawl down to the harbor and touch the water. And that is at the very north end of our historic cobblestone landing. And so you have a great view of boats coming into the harbor, and you really feel like you're part of Mississippi River life right there. So it's just lovely, lovely, lovely. So it is a beautiful thing to see Memphians of all shapes and sizes and ages and color and ethnicity and income gather on the river and feel like they're all part of the same community. And that's what the Civic Commons in its very best form does for any community.
Having been involved with reimagining the Civic Commons from the very beginning, when you reflect on the work that's been done over the past 10 plus years and the impact that it's had, what are you most proud of? And what opportunities, what possibilities lie ahead?
Reimagining the Civic Commons aspired to physically connect public assets like parks, libraries, rec centers, community centers. That's not easy to do, and you can't do that overnight. But I believe what we did successfully is we created those connections in the imagination of city officials, funders, and users that make them seem all of a piece, even if physically they aren't yet all of a piece. But to the extent we can think about them as connected assets and eventually get their leaders, the person who runs the libraries, who runs the parks, runs the rec centers, if the professionals can also embrace that imagination of connected assets, then you really start to hit on all cylinders for citizens, because together we can do much greater things than we can do apart. So there is so much more work to be done, and we've put this on a good trajectory, and I think we're all energized by this concept of making something more powerful for people and for communities than it ever could be with just a standalone asset.
Carol, thanks so much for joining me.
Absolutely. Thanks for the conversation.
2 things that Carol surfaced about this work that are really compelling to me. First is that a reimagined Civic Commons can really help people believe that a different future is possible, and that demonstrating that these neglected public assets can have a new life so visibly and joyfully really allows people to imagine that their city as a whole has this new amazing potential. And I feel like that hope, that belief and seeing your city differently feels really essential to me to rebuilding society. So that's one piece. The second is this notion that drawing people together in person across divides of race, income, age, religion, political persuasion in public space is one of the most democratic things we can do because it helps to push up against the stereotypes that are reinforced in a lot of different ways by media, but by others as well, every single day. So if we hope to reknit society, we need more shared moments of connection. And I think these moments sort of allow our humanity to shine. And I see the Civic Commons as being where those moments can emerge.
So that's our third and final city where we've done a deeper dive and heard directly from folks on the ground who've brought so much insight and texture to these conversations. Bridget, can you tell us about some of the other cities across the country that have also implemented the Civic Commons model?
So now we have teams in 11 different cities who are leading Civic Commons work on the ground. And each is really pursuing the model with different strategies that respond to their unique context. So it's not a cookie cutter approach, but rather a model that is meant to be customized by cities and teams. So while the team in Lexington, Kentucky is focused on translating insights from their successful Civic Commons downtown to the rest of the city through public policy and piloting, the team in Camden, New Jersey is laser focused on the role of maintenance and programming to really contribute to greater civic engagement, increased trust, and a more hopeful Camden. A team in Cincinnati is using the model to turn a defunct rail line along the Mill Creek into a new walking and biking path in order to reconnect disinvested neighborhoods to each other and to the rest of the city. So I think you'll see some through lines across all of the cities, but I think there's real beauty in seeing each local team really lean into their individual challenges that relate to these larger trends that we see happening nationally. But it allows them to make this theirs and to generate creative approaches to their own public realm in order to reconnect people across divides, cultivate trust, and create these more resilient communities.
So let's talk about how you measure the impact of all these Civic Commons initiatives. And one of the first things I know you did was to see what data parks departments, libraries, and other civic assets were already measuring. And what did you find?
What we found was that people were measuring operations. So we would see data points like number of acres mowed was something that virtually every parks department across the nation measures over time. Number of books in circulation, a very common metric for libraries. So if we want to tell a compelling story of impact, those are not the data points that give us that story, right?
Well, no, because they say nothing about the impact on people's lives.
Exactly. So we need to measure what matters. So back in 2016, we created a universal metric system to really start to capture the social impact of public spaces. So it's designed to demonstrate progress toward our four main outcomes: civic engagement, socioeconomic mixing, environmental sustainability, and value creation. And along with the metrics, we also developed a set of measurement tools. Site visitor intercept surveys, so you're stopping people in the park to ask them questions. Neighborhood door-to-door surveys, and other methodologies for capturing this different type of data. So we captured baseline in the demonstration cities starting in 2017 and have now released metrics reports for those cities that analyze change over a 7-year period. Overall, what we're seeing is that more people are connecting across difference of income and race. They're engaging in local community life. They're feeling greater connection to nature. We've seen visits to public spaces and interactions with new people when they're in those spaces have increased. People are more supportive of public funding for the public realm in these communities. Many communities have seen real estate values improve, and perceptions of community safety have increased. So the investments are not just changing the public spaces, but they're also elevating social connection, trust building, and generating hope for a better future.
And you've also collected qualitative data, right?
That's right. We interviewed residents and stakeholders. We captured stories of impact. And what we heard from the people on the ground reconfirms what we're seeing in the data, that investing in our civic commons in an intentional and collaborative way is changing people's everyday lives. I think you heard it in Grace Hudson's words. and in the way organizations are showing up in community. And I think you got that when you spoke with Alexa and Dan, that local government is thinking about trust building in a way that maybe they hadn't before. So I think Reimagining Civic Commons was really meant to demonstrate that we can invest in these public spaces in ways that do indeed connect people of all backgrounds, cultivate trust, and create more resilient communities. And I would say the data and the qualitative research is telling us that it's working.
And just thinking back to Reimagining the Civic Commons initial question, which you shared in part 1, and which really lit the way for the work that you do, and I'll repeat it here, that question was, what would a city look like that's putting each of its assets to work to connect people of different backgrounds, generate trust, and create more economically and environmentally resilient communities? And I think we've seen several examples today that paint a very positive and hopeful picture of what that might look like. So for those listening, what are some tangible things individuals can do in their own communities to help elevate the importance of public spaces and to encourage more people to use, care for, and feel ownership of them?
So first, I would say, get out there yourself. Experience your community's public spaces. Find out what's happening in your local park or your library or community center or your main street. Spend time out in these places and participate in public life. Show up for the yoga in the park. Get your kids off their screens and take them out on a bike ride on a local trail, or sign up for knitting class at the library. I think there's probably many different opportunities to get involved. And when you're there, strike up a conversation with someone new. These are, to me, the basic building blocks for renewed civic life. I would also say that the departments and the groups that manage these public spaces often need volunteers. So consider signing up to help out, whether that be a park cleanup or handing out surveys at a library. And then finally, I would say, if the civic infrastructure in your neighborhood is lacking, talk to your elected officials about where you see opportunities for improvement. These public spaces always need help in advocating for more resources and public budgets, and everyday citizen voices truly matter. That's important for business leaders too. Electeds are often persuaded when they hear from the private sector on these kind of issues. So I would say that's another role for the private sector, along with everyday citizens. Get out there and talk to your elected officials about what you want to see change and make it happen.
So I've been thinking about this myself. What can I do? And it's really easy to sit in a public space and pull out your phone. Maybe you feel a little awkward, or you're sitting at that cafe by yourself, so you pull out a book. And I'm going to really challenge myself to instead try to make eye contact with someone and to start a conversation. And there are so many creative things that people are doing. People wear badges that say, "Talk to me." There are companies out there that have created wearable, permission to connect tech. Some have scannable QR codes that link to various types of information about them. So there are all these ways that we ourselves can reimagine how we show up in these spaces. And I'm certainly going to be thinking a lot more about that as a result of this conversation.
I love that, and I completely agree. And I think just knowing that those little conversations, you never know what it's going to lead to, first off. And even if it just stays a polite smile and a wave or a few words, I think those moments have major impact on how you feel about your day.
They most definitely do for me. So Bridget, I'd like to ask you to step back for a moment and share some personal reflections about the work you do. What is it that drives your commitment to this work? Why does reimagining our civic commons matter so much? And what has being involved in this work meant to you personally?
Yeah, so we're in a really bad spot in this country. And I think the challenges we face can feel really overwhelming at times. I have 2 teens. Sometimes the future feels incredibly bleak for them. They've lived through a pandemic only to find sort of a crumbling democracy on the other side. And this is their childhood. So I guess personally, I feel like I can see a pathway to a better future for this country. And it's like, what role can I play in getting us to a place where it's a better future for them? And I think it's incumbent upon each and every one of us to find ways to build social connection, particularly across diversity, to create a sense of belonging for others, and to counter these really terrible winds of isolation, division, fear, and distrust. So I guess my belief comes down to that I think human connection is the bedrock for democracy, and I feel like we're fighting hard for that in this country in this moment. And I see the built environment as a pathway for influencing us every single day and influencing our relationships with other people every single day. So these spaces can either encourage social connection or discourage us from leaving our homes. They can be these platforms for introducing us to other cultures and opening our eyes to other beliefs in this joyful way, or we can keep siloed in our corners. And so I would say leading this initiative and supporting teams working on the ground feels like my way of doing my part to reignite civic culture. And honestly, I just feel like where we are right now, I can't imagine anything more urgent than really thinking about how we have a rebirth around civic culture.
So we've talked a lot about the decline in social connection in our communities, but there's also a growing desire, and as you alluded to, a real urgency to bring people back together. We see leaders like yourself, Dan Rice and Grace Hudson in Akron, Alexa Bush and Karlyta Williams in Detroit, and Coletta in Memphis, creating tangible change in their communities. Are you optimistic that by strengthening our public realm, we can restore those frayed bonds and rebuild our shared civic life?
So I'm really an optimist at heart. And when I see these challenges, rather than being sort of completely overwhelmed, I try to find a pathway forward. And I think what inspires me every day in this work is this incredibly diverse network of leaders who are on the ground in cities across the country. People like Dan and Grace, Alexa and Karlyta and Carol, they're committed to doing this work and ultimately building this greater movement to harness the power of the commons. And I would say now the question is, who else wants to be part of this movement, right? Who else wants to rebuild our country by rebuilding the shared civic life of our communities? Because I think that's what these folks are really doing.
They sure are. And these conversations have certainly served as a bit of a call to action for me, and perhaps they've planted a seed for some of our listeners as well. So Bridget, we're just about out of time, but before I let you go, how can people learn more about reimagining the Civic Commons? And are there resources available for people interested in learning how to transform their own public spaces into catalysts for trust, social connection, and resilience?
Yes. So you can learn more on that website. You'll find descriptions of the work in each of the participating cities, as well as a variety of resources, including reports, toolkits, case studies, action guides, our measurement framework, interactive card decks, you name it, it's up there, that we put out there to be helpful for people who want to learn from this model, learn from what's working on the ground in other communities, and really take it home and transform their own public spaces.
Bridget, I want to thank you so much for joining us here at the ReImagination Café, where our aim is to highlight people who are reimagining work in order to address society's biggest challenges and to steer our collective ship in a better direction. And your work really epitomizes that. So it has been such an honor to have you on the show and to be able to highlight and amplify the wonderful work you're doing. I cannot thank you enough for sharing so many valuable insights with us here today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a joy being in conversation with you, and just thrilled to have the initiative highlighted in this way.
A big thank you to Dan Rice, Grace Hudson, Alexa Bush, Coletta, Karlyta Williams, and of course, Bridget Marquis, for showing us that by investing in our public spaces, we can build connection, strengthen communities, and help create a better future for us all. For more conversations and additional insights from our guests, please visit our website and our YouTube channel. That's it for this episode of the Reimagination Cafe. I'm Jessica Cherry. Thanks so much for listening.